Welcome to The Other Side, Mississippi Today's political podcast. I'm your host, Adam Ganeshow. The Other Side lets you hear directly from the most connected players and observers across the spectrum of politics in Mississippi. From breaking news to political strategy to interviews with candidates and elected officials, we'll bring you facts, perspectives, and context that helps you cut through the noise and understand all sides of the story. You'll also hear from our award-winning journalists who will share their insights as they cover the upcoming elections and biggest political stories in the state.
Hello, I'm Bobby Harrison, filling in for Adam Ganeshaw. Adam usually hosts these podcasts every week, but he's out today. And I'm here with our fellow political reporter, Jeff Pender. And Jeff's going to introduce our guest today and get this podcast started.
Yeah, thanks, Bobby. Today we're joined by Ed Langton. He is a member of the State Board of Health. He's also chairman and CEO of Grand Bank in Hattiesburg, very active in the community in Hattiesburg, and is past president of the USM Foundation, Alumni Association, and numerous other groups. But today we're here to talk with Mr. Langton in his role with the State Board of Health about Initiative 65, ballot initiative coming up on the November 3rd ballot to potentially legalize medical marijuana in Mississippi. There's also a competing legislative medical marijuana ballot choice, 65A. We'll get into some of those particulars in a minute, but our State Board of Health has come out strongly in opposition to Initiative 65 as it is written and proposed. And Mr. Langton, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And we'll let you get into a little bit about why the Board of Health is opposed to this initiative.
Thank you so much. I appreciate this opportunity. And I might say that some of my friends are for it and some of my friends are against it.
Sure. Like the whiskey speech.
But I am for my friends.
You're for your friends, okay.
And I will tell you that, in all honesty, a lot of friends that confide in me say, Ed, look, I smoke marijuana, or I'm for marijuana. And I said, well, I get that. I understand it. But have you read Initiative 65? No. I said, well, a lot of people haven't, including a lot of people that thought they were signing on to something that would be a good thing. Because everybody believes that if I can get something medical marijuana, you just put the word medical in front of marijuana, it sounds good, and it's very compassionate, and that's the whole approach on it. So anyway, once they read the actual amendment, and we have what's called a red line, which just basically explains the very legal, complex language within Initiative 65. It's a 7-page document that won't appear on a ballot. So it's critically important for voters to be able to understand the ramifications of what they're voting for, which I'll be glad this morning to try to explain to you. So once they read that, they realize that all of these complexities and problems that will occur. And the biggest problem with something like this is when you hear snippets, and we're in a snippet society is what I call it, that we hear just little blurbs and we think that's the gospel. So people can spin it, they can talk about this and that. And what I'm here about is to get down to the actual document itself, the language in the document, to not be confused about how somebody tells you they interpret
right
what's said.
The exact
read it.
Details of this.
Yes.
You and I have discussed this as well, and I think, like you kind of mentioned, a lot of people, I think we've seen polls bear this out both in Mississippi and nationwide. A lot of people, as you said, out of compassion think, well, if someone's suffering from a chronic illness, terminal illness, going through chemotherapy, something like that. I think a lot of people think, well, okay, if marijuana or whatever will help these folks, give them some relief, help them eat, whatever, let them use it.
And it's not as bad as opioids.
Sure, there's been discussions about that this could, perhaps alleviate some of the opioid problem. I guess what you're saying and what the Board of Health has been saying is not per se against medical usage of marijuana, but the devil's in the details on this proposal.
Right.
Why don't we jump right into what do you see are some of the biggest problems with
All right, sure.
the way this is proposed?
Glad to. And first of all, let me address there are 4 FDA approved medicines to treat a lot of the ailments that they do.
Marinol
and Epidiolex is one that. Matter of fact, I was talking with a neurologist the other day, and he was talking about this. Said people don't realize that if you don't get scientifically tested medicine, that you can get harmful effects by just taking the 100 compounds all in a joint, and the percentage of THC now has gone from 2% to as much as 70%, and in liquid form, in gummies and things of that sort, it can be 95% or more. You're talking about very serious effects, and those effects are being seen in other states that have legalized this. So what he said was Epidiolex is a derivative of the CBD oil, but it is in a specified formulation. If you don't take that formulation, you can have more serious side effects. That's why we have medicine that goes through trials that's determined to say this is the right dosage for you. Advil has got more regulations than this will have on it. It's just marijuana. You can put medical on it like medical ice cream or medical cola, but it doesn't make it necessarily medical. To your point, Jeff, let's get into some of the complications and problems. First of all, this entire effort was done by, and actually it was Joel Baumgar has been about this for years.
State representative
from Madison
Baumgar.
County. And there's been $3.2 million raised as of the end of January. Okay, it's even more now. And nearly $1 million was out-of-state marijuana industry money. This is big marijuana coming to Mississippi. And when you read this entire 65, you're going to see that this is to protect the marijuana industry from regulation. It ties the hands of the legislature, the executive branch, and even judicial to where you have to, when you put something in the Constitution of the state of Mississippi, that is the edict. That overrides and supersedes state law. And
it's hard to change.
That's right, Bobby. Yeah. In other words, you have to go back 4 years from now. They raised $3.2 million, spent $1 million with the guy to just be able to put it on the ballot to get signatures. And people signing things, they weren't reading the whole amendment. They just said, oh, that sounds good medically. Yeah, people suffering, they need it. My wife had breast cancer, and she's a survivor. And I watched her in pain. She had chemo and radiation, and she wasn't taking marijuana. She was taking medicine that were prescribed by the doctors. And that's another thing, prescribed. This is not a prescription. The doctors are not giving a prescription. They're saying, I certify you. You tell me you're in chronic pain. I've got no device to put on you to determine the level of pain you have. You've been in the hospital. Look at the chart. You tell me what pain you have. That's all that's required. So if I come in and tell you I got 10 on pain, I certify you're eligible to take this marijuana. And in most states, the percentage of people taking marijuana, it's chronic pain. It's not all these illnesses. Embedded in this amendment, when they talk about debilitating condition, medical condition, it has in there chronic pain. Well, that's the catch-all to be able to go to a doctor and say, I need a medical marijuana card.
Doesn't it have another catch-all as well, kind of at the end, that says any similar class of illness that a doctor thinks marijuana would be?
You're spot on, and obviously you've read it.
Sure.
So, no doubt.
One thing you mentioned, which I guess has been one argument against this from the get-go, is putting essentially a product in the Constitution. That's somewhat unusual, correct?
There's never been a product put in a state of Constitution. Why would you put a product in the Constitution? The Constitution is to make the framework by which the laws of the state should operate, the legislative, executive, judicial branches, and so forth. It's not for the purpose of putting every little thing you want to do. Any good thing can be abused, and this really is an abuse of the process. Now, they can complain the legislature didn't do it for them, but what was requested many times was just basically, we just want to create a marijuana industry. And here we are, they figured out a way to override it, and they figured out from other states, how can we tweak all the provisions to where we totally are in control and can't be touched.
Yeah, that's a sort of a flaw, if you will, in our state initiative process. The only way you can do a citizen-sponsored initiative in Mississippi is to put it in the Constitution. You can't do a citizen-sponsored initiative for a general law. And I contend that, there's arguments on both sides, but there's a large number of people who support medical marijuana if you look at the polls. And perhaps the legislature dropped the ball by not trying to pass a law that would have more regulations, more guidelines than what this initiative that is on the ballot right now. Do y'all have a position on the alternative?
Yes,
the State Board of Education.
The
State Board of Health.
Yes, the alternative is Initiative 65A. A is an apple. That was the legislature coming together in January. Of course, this thing hit everybody's table saying, "Oh my goodness, they're changing the Constitution." So when we read the amendment, including the legislature, they said, my goodness, which we're going to get into, like Jeff asked, some of these provisions that once you hear this, you'll understand why people that are for marijuana, medical or recreation, read this amendment and say, this is not good for the state of Mississippi. So the legislature came together. We need to do, and it's like everything, Bobby, you and Jeff know this, it's difficult to get 82 together to agree on something, but they did overwhelmingly agree we need to put a framework of 65A to be able to initiate a true medical marijuana. Now, let me tell you how that evolved too. The health department wanted to hear from the proponents of 65. We invited them to a public health board meeting December 19th of 19. I think it was the 19th, but anyway, in December, that we heard them out, let them do the entire presentation. We had Dr. Walker from Ole Miss, who is we're the only one in the state that can grow marijuana for research purposes.
On the nation.
In the nation, as I understand it, yes. And which is pretty incredible. And he wants to be able to do more research to develop true medical. He thinks there are compounds, 100 of them, as the neurologist told me, you have to do scientific research to get what right compound or combination is right. So we heard it out. We asked questions. We confronted the fact that there were problems with it. And that's when we came out with both a resolution against it as well as an op-ed. So the legislature took it on and said, we do want to, because of all this discussion and what we're talking about, let's get an alternative to let the legislature take this and develop a true medical marijuana program that will override some of these very faulty errors in 65, which I'll get into. Is that a good explanation for what you were asking me?
I guess, does the State Board of Health have a position on 65A at all, or?
Well, we haven't come out with an official, but if the ballot, let's talk about that. It's complicated, which everybody's talking about. There are two portions to the ballot. You either vote, no, I'm against any constitutional amendment, which we are suggesting to vote no against medical marijuana provisions in the Constitution. But let's say that doesn't override and get voted on. It's say we are for a medical marijuana, then we are for 65A, not 65. So it's kind of like, which choice do you get when you get to that fork in the road?
One thing that strikes me in this whole debate, your agency, the agency your board oversees, is the one that would be tasked with running a medical marijuana program, the taxation for it, basically, but you're against it. Thinking beyond that, if this passes, what will the health department do? Are you going to be able to run such a program, do you think?
Well, once again, and they're saying we gave them feedback and they took that into designing it. That's not true. The board never authorized support of this 65, okay? And a very important thing you said tax it. This is the cleverly worded legal language in 65. They don't call it taxing. It's a fee or a charge that they assess to the sale, to the growing, to whatever. This is totally in their hands.
That can be up to equal of the state sales tax.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
so
so
the voter is
it would even increase if the sales tax increased.
That's exactly right.
But it's not a tax.
It's not a tax. And they did that for this purpose. They also, in the amendment, state the state, cities, or counties cannot tax nor fee anything to do with 65 medical marijuana. They go back to the Section 1. The purpose is to promote the medical marijuana business, okay? So they say that the state, the cities, and the counties cannot get any revenue from the marijuana business. It all stays in a special fund in the state. Now, that fund can't be touched by the legislature. It doesn't, not one red cent goes into the general fund. It's all held there for their purpose. Think about creating an industry to where you know you have the protection of the Constitution to lock up all the money strictly for you where nobody can grab it.
And, I mean, it sounds as if they just want the money for the operation of the program. So at some point, I assume there's going to be more money than it takes to operate the program. It really doesn't address how that money is to be spent or what to be done with that money.
Right.
Am I correct?
That's one thing that strikes me, Mr. Langton. We looking at some other states, and you and I have talked about Oklahoma, I guess similar in population to us, considered to have some of the most permissive medical marijuana laws. But some rough math I've looked at, if I recall correctly, they last year had over $340 million in medical marijuana sales. They're a state of 3.8 or 3.9 million people, about like us. Let's say Mississippi had similar sales in a year. If it were taxed fees were on it of 7%, the health department would be collecting somewhere around $24 million in a single year. Is the program going to cost that much to run? First off, and then secondly, okay, where's that money going to go? Just sit in an account?
So now we've interjected Pandora's box.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what you're talking about, is huge amounts of money that come in. It depends. We are appointed. The 11 board members are appointed, not elected. When you get big marijuana money in this thing, they're going to influence who is going to be appointed to that board. And they're going to want appointees that are going to be in favor of the marijuana business. That's just a given. And so a lot of these things that we're saying, well, what happens if and all? My favorite saying is when somebody says, I need a piece of string. Well, how long is a piece of string? And that's where we are. How long is a piece of string? There are many items that are going to be litigated. These other states are going through lots of litigation about these things, which will tie up our courts and be very contentious.
Well, speaking of potential litigation, back to the taxation issue, it would seem to me a non-elected, appointed board essentially levying a tax up to 7%. Is that not an opening for a constitutional ground lawsuit? I mean, taxation is
very
supposed
perceptive,
to be.
and I think you're right. I have said all along that this 65, I don't think it's constitutionally right. I think it's a flawed amendment to begin with for things just like what you're saying.
Although other agencies levy fees, but typically they're at the least ratified by the elected legislature or local boards.
But the flip side of that, and I'm no judge and didn't stay at a Holiday Inn last night, but it's but if it's in the Constitution, then it's constitutional.
Sure. Then sure.
So you
except
right.
for when two constitutional provisions clash, and taxation with representation is a key. Even in our federal Constitution, I mean, that just seems like
you're right.
an issue that might be in the courts at some point.
And I will say that the fiscal analysis that the Legislative Budget Office came out with that's going to be on the ballot is extraordinarily confusing and difficult. Even somebody in the financial business would have to read it 10 times to try to figure out really what it means. But I will tell you, breaking it down on a simple basis, that the first year, they're saying that about $13 million, I think, first year cost offset by revenue is $11 million. In the amendment, we can only borrow from the state $2.5 million.
$2.5 million.
So we got an $8.5 million negative loss the first year. Now, where does that money come from? But, we keep going to other states, and this is not the same law, which is not law. It's constitutional amendment, as Bobby says. It's not the same as other states. It's not apples to apples. So you really can become, again, very confused by saying, well, this state says this is what happens.
Now, some states have done this by constitutional amendment.
Right.
Though,
but the constitutional amendment they had and the constitutional amendment we have are not apples to apples. That's what's important to understand. So no tax. Also, when you get a medical marijuana card, you then go into the so-called treatment center, and that's another very important thing. They have definitions in 65. A treatment center is defined. One word that's critically important, and this is where legalese goes, is process or processing. That word is a defined term as well. And processing is everything from seed to sale, growing, distribution, you name it. So a dispensary or a treatment center, a dispensary is not defined. A treatment center is all encompassing of all these things. They've reduced the zoning, which they can have as many treatment centers in the state as they want. They spin it saying, well, the market will control that.
Right.
But look in other states. In Oklahoma, it's 3,200, I think, right now, and growing.
Well, let me ask you this, because speaking of Oklahoma issues separate licenses for dispensaries. I think they have 2,200 of those. Growers, they have like 5,000 of those. They're distinct licenses and, as I understand, treated distinctly. What you're saying, Initiative 65 considers someone growing plants, someone taking the plants and turning them into products or whatever, and someone dispensing it to certified patients. They're all the same in the eyes of
under the definitions, they're all the same. You're spot on. Other states may have different language in what they've got. But when you say they license the growing, license this and license that, that's not what the language says. It just says this is a treatment center. And further in the amendment, it defines the things that are under zoning, which, by the way, our state currently, in the law of the state of Mississippi, a liquor store, whatever, has to be 1,500 feet from a church or school. You have the safe school zone. They've reduced it in the constitutional amendment to 500 feet for marijuana. So you can have somebody selling marijuana within 500 feet of a church or school, or growing it, or dispensing it, or whatever.
As I recall from the proposed amendment, it even addresses local zoning, correct? It says that local prohibition or zoning on medical marijuana dispensaries cannot be any more restrictive than for pharmacies, correct?
Well, it goes on. It's a run-on sentence. It's a very interesting sentence that English majors would have fun with, but it goes on about any commercial endeavor. So cities and counties, now get this, there are few counties that have zoning regulations in counties.
Right.
So when you have no zoning regulations, it's the Wild West. You can put them wherever you want, next to a home, next to a subdivision, or whatever. But even in cities, it prevents a city from establishing a specific zoning for medical marijuana, the treatment centers.
Right.
So you as you say, it goes any pretty much commercial business or pharmacy. They put pharmacy, but it's added to be commercial businesses as well.
Oh, so not just
pharmacy, isolated pharmacies.
So if I live, let's say, in a North Jackson neighborhood, and there's a convenience store near me or a CVS or something, a marijuana dispensary could go just as close.
That's right.
To the home. Is that okay?
Faulkner would have been proud.
5.
Huh?
Do what?
Faulkner would have been proud, huh?
Yeah.
Or maybe he wouldn't have been proud. I said, this is not a good sentence.
Yeah.
This may be a pipe dream. And
no pun intended, right?
yeah, no pun. Honest to God, no pun intended. But the legislature is still in session in this unusual pandemic year. And there's actually a rule suspension to draft a bill to just pass a general marijuana law that would be governed by the legislature like liquor is, like all other drugs are. Is there any thought, and it's getting, I know it's getting late, close to the election, but is any thought of the State Board of Health using its considerable influence to try to get the legislature to take that up and to just deal with marijuana like you would liquor and cigarettes, and maybe there's people that don't like cigarettes, but they say, well, it's in the law and people have a right to use it, but it's governed and regulated,
and taxed.
Is there any thought of the State Board of Health using its influence to try to get the legislature to address it as a general law instead of a constitutional amendment?
Well, we're not at that point. I can't really say because we haven't met on that and don't know. And I'm not really, even as I sit, up to date on exactly what the legislature is doing. But I hope that their efforts do come to fruition as far as trying to develop something that would be the law. Now, as you say, we didn't stay in Holiday Inn last night, but I will tell you that it's a question as to if they pass that law first, whether the Constitution will override that law. And that's the litigation.
People who might support medical marijuana might be more inclined to vote against the alternative if there was a general law out there that they knew was going to be on the books.
A point well taken, and I think that's astute. Yeah,
that gets to one argument I've heard from some folks that I guess would in part agree with y'all that. Yeah, there are some obvious issues with this initiative, but one argument I've heard as well, the legislature's alternative is bogus. It's just meant as a spoiler for this vote. And we've seen a push for medical marijuana for years and seen that the legislature is very reluctant to do anything. So I guess in the thought of, well, the legislature is never going to approve this, never going to do anything. People who support medical marijuana may say, well, then I'm going to go with 65, even though I realize there are some problems because, I support this.
Well, I will tell you, and this is based on my experience talking with the legislature and so forth, I believe that it is a time when they're really sincerely trying to develop a true medical marijuana. Of course, people can have their opinion and say what they think, but I sincerely believe that it has become such a focus attention to this, and knowing that the public does want something, let's do our best efforts to get scientific research to develop a true medical marijuana. The Diddlex, whatever.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, y'all. I'm not a doctor.
Easy for you to say.
but anyway, that medicine was passed by a lot of concern about developing a product. So there's no reason why we can't. And Dr. Walker, who at Ole Miss, he's saying my Christmas present I want is for us to be able to conduct good scientific research. UMC's got a doctor that looks at this and he's saying, I'm frustrated because we just need money to do that. We want to research it. There's a desire. One of the things they say in this, Jamie Graham says, well, God created this plant, so it's good for people. Well, God created poison ivy and a lot of other plants too, thistles and so forth. So it's not, let's not get God involved.
Opium poppies.
Opium poppies and so forth. So as the neurologist said, you better make sure this has got the right scientific dosage and administration. That's what medicine's all about. The health department wants healthy outcomes for the citizens. That's our job. Why would we be opposed to something that's going to help citizens? This is just embedded in this whole effort is disguising that we want to make a lot of money off marijuana. Matter of fact, the proponent that started this, he's on all kinds of investment banking deals to grow the industry and spending millions in it. And it's money. It's money, money, money.
Along those lines, I just some of the research I've done lately, most states where medical marijuana has been around for any amount of time, I think Arkansas passed it in 2016. It appears there is a healthy push in most, if not all, those states for recreational afterward. Again, you and I were talking earlier. I think there are 34 states with medical. Of those, 11 have recreational.
Well, 22 medical, 11 recreational.
Sure, but considering if you count the 11 as medical as well.
All total, sure. 33.
But 11 have recreational. You just said you think this is a push by big marijuana. Do you see this as just a given that we're going to see that
I do.
continue on as a push for recreation?
It's happened time and time again.
Do you foresee any way, if this passes, that the marijuana being produced for the medical program is not going to end up being used on the black market, sold on the black market?
That's an excellent point, and I'm glad you brought it up. The other provision in 65, you get the medical card, the medical marijuana card, and here are numerous ramifications of that. You go into the dispensary center, the treatment center.
Right.
And they got caregivers and all that. What are they going to care for? They're giving you marijuana.
Yeah.
All right. You go in, you say, okay, how much is it? $400, $500, whatever. It's more expensive than the street, the black market. So they say, well, here's what you owe. Well, put it on Medicaid. Put it on Medicare. Put it on my private health insurance, Blue Cross, United Healthcare. And they say, They won't allow us to do that. They won't reimburse because it's federally illegal Schedule I drug. You have to pay cash. This is a cash business. The health department—
Because banks won't typically touch it, right?
Banks typically won't. Severe regulations and complications. So that's another thing. We don't know how we're going to handle. This is huge handling of cash. So that person the low-income people are the ones that are going to be the most hurt by this amendment, because they will not be able to get it paid for. They have to pay cash. They say, well, I can go on the street and use my medical marijuana. I can go on the street and buy it, and I'll just flash my medical marijuana card and say, I got this from the dispensary center. So your point's well taken.
But you're saying it would be a boon for the black market.
That's exactly right. That's right.
Not the medical being sold because it's so expensive.
But what they're calling for is 2.5 ounces per 14 days. That's 5 ounces in a 28-day period. It gets complicated because there's 0.34 grams in a joint average, okay? There's 146 grams in an ounce, so or in the 5 ounces. So actually you're going to have 300 plus joints a month available to smoke. People will get this and they'll be selling it in neighborhoods because they won't be able to use all 300 joints. So it will create another supply chain for people to take what they get and resell.
You mentioned the cash business. So is the health department going to have to buy a big vault?
Well, that's the thing. And the proponents keep saying, well, we can engage other agencies to do all these things for us. Well, it doesn't say we can in the amendment. They keep saying we can do all these things that are not in the amendment that authorize us to do that. And the state's going to be saying, hey, Wait a minute, we need money for roads, bridges, education, and so forth. The things that we hear every year in the legislature needs money for. Not one red cent can be used for all that. So they're not going to be saying we're going to be spending some of our general fund to do all these other things.
So I think you raised some interesting points and covered all of the topics. Is there anything else you want to add? Or
Yeah, if I could just run through quickly without great explanation, but you can smoke it, you can vape it. We've got huge problems with vaping. Gummies, brownies. A parent can give consent to the physician to issue a marijuana card to a juvenile, to a minor, and they can take those things and eat them before they go in school or put them in their lunchbox. Second Amendment rights, critically important. There are 2 letters posted, and the websites are like www.stopmspot.com has got postings of the red line, of the Department of Justice memos, the ATF agency, and so forth. But if you have a medical marijuana card and you apply for a firearm, to purchase a firearm, you cannot get a firearm. If they suspect you of taking marijuana or having a medical marijuana card, and there'll be a registry out there, then you can't get a firearm. You also lose your concealed carry permit. And those letters are posted on the websites. There's another website, www.mississippihorizonsingular.org. By the way, the proponents grabbed that website and added an S to take it over to their website. That's what we're dealing with, not a level playing field. mississippihorizonsingular.org. The other misconception, very important point, Bobby, is that it will not decriminalize marijuana. People think that if somebody is incarcerated now, that this passes, it's legalizing to where they can get out of jail. That is not the case. It doesn't decriminalize. The Second Amendment rights, of course, up to 25 years of age, the brain is being developed, medically proven. This greatly degradates that development of the brain. It's more potent today. There's 17 to 28% THC in it. If you get the brownies, the gummies, it can give you up to 80, 90%. We need to treat medical marijuana like any other medicine. It needs to go through FDA approval and be scientific. Section 8 housing could be affected. If you're taking marijuana, it's against federal law. You could be evicted out of Section 8 housing. Law enforcement is going to absolutely have a nightmare with this, and most all the sheriffs and chiefs of police know that. So as you can see, and I appreciate so much this opportunity to go over a lot of this, you see how pervasive, how difficult it is. And we're going to be talking a lot about litigation. What do we do with this? What do we do with that? And we also, the important thing here is, if it's your family, I'd say this all the time, if my house is burning and your house is burning, which one do we put out first? And I'll tell you, if your kids are getting addicted to marijuana and they have peers that are going to school and having marijuanas and they share their gummies, if they're vaping, where is this going with your family? That's what you're voting for if you vote for 65. Vote against 65. Vote no for any constitutional amendment and vote 65A.
You raised some interesting points. Appreciate your time. And before we get in, I know this is a contentious issue with a lot of different opinions on it. And before we get any cards and letters, a few months ago, we did a podcast talking to the proponents of 65. So you can find that on our archives if you want to hear the flip side of it. And so anyway, appreciate your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
As we cover the coronavirus pandemic and the biggest political stories in the state, you don't want to miss an episode of The Other Side. We'll bring you more reporting from every corner of the state, sharing the voices of Mississippians and how they are impacted by the news. So what do we need from you, the listener? We need your feedback and support. If you listen to the podcast on a player like iTunes or Stitcher, please subscribe to the show and leave us a review. We also have an email in which you can share your feedback. That address is podcast@MississippiToday.org. Y'all can also reach out to me or any of my colleagues through social media or email. And as always, thank you for your feedback and support. Subscribe to our weekly podcast on your favorite podcast app or stream episodes online at MississippiToday.org/The Other Side. For the Mississippi Today team, I'm Adam Ganeshow. The Other Side is produced by Mississippi Today and engineered by Blue Sky Studios. We hope you'll join us for our next episode.